Recording. Go ahead. Recording now, honey.
All these technological things that we go through each week. So currently, I'm plowing through this new book called The Dawn of Everything. Anybody heard of it? So it's apparently a bestseller. It's also 500 pages. So I'm just plowing my way through it, and I'm reading it more slowly than I usually read it because it's really hard to understand. So one of the things, or the biggest things that the author, it's two authors claim, is that civilization actually came about very differently from the way that we all imagined it. So according to them, human beings were always a very diverse lot, with Cro-Magnon and Neanderthals and any other version of humanity interbreeding. And our prehistoric hunter-gatherer parents were not cave folk wielding clubs saying, you know, me Tarzan, Eugene, but rather very intelligent people who thought complex thoughts and lived in very complex societies from the very beginning. And contrary to popular belief, farming did not necessarily lead to the construction of cities, and the construction of cities did not lead to the stratification of society between rulers and peons. And the authors give all sorts of examples of these huge ancient cities predating Sumeria, whose residents lived in egalitarian societies. So historians were once quick to dismiss the findings in these sites because they really didn't fit neatly into their preconceived ideas about what human progress really looked like. The authors also write that it was women who figured out how to plan and build and orchestrate the very complex feeding systems that enabled human beings to grow and thrive. And there was this like weird sentence in there. They also found out that women were better shots than men. I don't know. I just thought And while some people certainly lived in areas that might have looked like the Garden of Eden, for instance, in areas of North America, especially in the Northeast, you know, the streams are filled with fishes. There's nut trees and fruit trees. So people lived in a society of plenty, but they also did not live in primal innocence. In fact, the authors write, the American Indians that the Europeans regarded as being primitive savages actually planted the seeds of an egalitarian society in the minds of the Europeans. And it was the Indians through the Europeans that sparked the Enlightenment. So how's that for a precipitous? So what happens when new knowledge opens our eyes to different possibilities? For a lot of folks, a book like this turns what they believe to be settled upside down. And so a whole series of questions emerge. I always have questions. Who settles what and for whom? And does this settling of things give some the right to impose their settled beliefs on those who are unwilling? And how do those in power ensure that certain unsettled things go unnoticed for millennia? So today, our first reading and our gospel are all about babies, royal babies, babies destined for greatness, male babies, of course, babies named Ishmael, Isaac, and Jesus. And according to Will Gaffney, the author of the Women's Lectionary for the Whole Church, which we're basically using this year, the women are very special as well. Mary, the mother of Jesus, is named for Miriam, the leader of the Israelites during Exodus. Sarah's name indicates that she's royalty, and the name Elizabeth or Elisheba is a priestly name. In spite of the fact of the important names of these biblical women, the gift of being able to shoot straight, and being smart enough to develop agriculture and horticulture, the history of women has too often come down to us as the settled fact that women are merely incubators. And like the very ancient, highly advanced civilizations, dismissed by scholars because they didn't fit into the widely held belief that humanity has always progressed from simple to complex, ideas that fail to fit into the patriarchal defined motherhood picture get explained away or legislated away by people who choose not to see that women are full human beings in charge of the sanctity and the integrity of their own bodies. And so we might rejoice with Elizabeth and Sarah with their unexpected pregnancies. The pregnancy of Hagar, who is Ishmael's mother, might have been something completely different. She was a slave, and in spite of the innocuous language surrounding the conception of Ishmael, Hagar was actually raped by Abraham. Mary's pregnancy in Matthew is originally a cause for shame. Joseph intended to put her away until God helped him to see that Mary was the woman that he loved. Thus, the history of women has also been a history of problem pregnancies, some of which worked out, others that didn't, sometimes with dire consequences for the mother and the child. In this, Hagar and Ishmael were hardly an anomaly. So last week, we talked about difficult pregnancies that led to joyful outcomes and healthy children. And I used to work in the neonatal intensive care unit in a very busy hospital in Philadelphia, in a place where pregnancies went awry and did not and could not lead to a healthy child or a healthy mother. There was the healthy 30-year-old with undiagnosed preeclampsia who was 25 weeks pregnant and who actually coded in her vet's office. The vet administered CPR and the hospital delivered a very premature baby who spent a very long time recovering in our unit. Other mothers were not so fortunate. A very good friend of mine, a school nurse, developed preeclampsia. She almost died. Her 25-week-old fetus did die. The babies of women who developed uncontrolled preeclampsia were routinely delivered, regardless of the fetus's level of prematurity. And those babies landed in our unit, received all the intensive care that they needed, and may or may not have survived. But unless those babies were delivered, the mothers would have died, and the babies with them. Unfortunately, our for-profit health system often cannot, does not, and chooses not to provide the care that pregnant women need and deserve. A terrible fact, which makes us in America have the highest rate of maternal mortality in the developed world. In 2019, the maternal mortality rate was 20.1 deaths per 100,000, up from 17.4 in 2018. The maternal mortality rate for Black women who often receive subpar care is a staggering 44 per 100,000. And for women like Sarah and Elizabeth who are over 40, the death rate is 75.5 out of 100,000 women. And so what happened to the babies who graduated from our unit? Thankfully, most of them went on to live perfectly normal lives. Some had, unfortunately, severe cognitive deficits and cerebral palsy that required a lifetime of care. I worked with children with severe cognitive and physical issues caused by any number of illnesses and genetic defects in the Philadelphia public schools. And here again, our health system fails the most vulnerable among us. While insurance does pay for many of the things that the children required, there remains no seamless garment of care. Parents spend most of their time advocating for their children, a fact that places unbearable stress upon families and often led to the breakup of marriages and the neglect of other children. After the children turn 21, programs are few and far between, and parents remain the primary caregivers, even when they become sick and elderly. Respite care is virtually non-existent. And a really sad fact is the fact that once a disabled child, a severely disabled child, or any child, reaches 18, even the child abuse agencies refuse to take reports of abuse. I know because I tried to make reports for kids who came to school on Monday wearing the same diaper that the teachers put on them on Friday afternoon. So, my friends, God sees this reality as the revocation of her kingdom values, and she weeps. The value and mission of She Who Saves has never varied and remains constant in spite of efforts to ignore or retell her story. Creation still waits with eager longing to be transformed into a place where the sick are healed and the vulnerable are cared for, regardless of the cost. The generous one has always transcended the ability to pay. In spite of the long and tenacious tentacles of the patriarchy, the mighty one has always and everywhere stood with the Hagars of the world, rather than with those who demand the sacrifice of women's bodies as the collateral damage required by God for salvation history to proceed. God, the womb of life, and the warrior protectrix, groans in labor, continuing to give birth to a new heavens and a new earth that should look very different from the one that we live in. She expects that those who love her to redeem the bodies of those in distress and not punish them, imprison them, or ignore their obvious needs. The Holy Mother God, eternal, does not make covenants with guys like Abraham, whose legal sons will go on to produce more sons with more unwilling enslaved women like Hagar, Jacob's slaves Bilhah and Zilpah, and David's victim Bathsheba. She enters into a covenant with everyone who believes in her. And we all know that covenants with the divine are never easy. It's why they are so often misinterpreted, beginning in Genesis, where the story of creation itself is rewritten. So how do we manage to keep our part of the covenant in spite of the misinformation? Our second reading offers us a word that exemplifies Advent and perhaps all of life itself. And that word is hope, a steely thread that runs through history, making all things possible. There are examples of hope everywhere, especially in scripture, that go so often unnoticed. So in spite of the evils of the patriarchy, there was a woman, a leader named Mary, who was not put away by her husband to be, and went on to raise a son who was so compassionate that he gave his life so that others may live. That son went on to inspire a woman named Prisca to found the church at Rome, and a woman named Junia, who was described by a man who knew all of the earliest followers of Jesus. This man, Paul, named Junia as foremost among the apostles. Like the ancient women who founded agriculture, these women in the Bible call out to us to remember who they are and what they did. And so, my brothers and sisters, today we ask Jesus, the son of Hagar and Bathsheba, to be with us on our Advent journey towards enlightenment and transformation, while the wellspring of life tries repeatedly to give birth to a new heavens and a new earth, where all have a name and a place at the table, and all are served a heaping helping of comfort and joy.